sets, so we only have radar invisibility and not optical invisibility. We would prefer this because in those days you had no long-range sonar or all the navigational systems we have today. It's questionable whether they would have worked in those conditions too, but in any case, we don't want the ships to be invisible because at night in a convoy we could have one ship ramming another.
Yeah, but you were so far along. I mean, this system was designed to give you invisibility.
Right.
And how could you in 12 days have any chance of changing any of the engineering around so that all you could do is have optical or radar invisibility?
Neumann said there was no problem to do this. You just backtrack slightly on how far you carry this in terms of the phase differential field in relation to the main field. And he apparently was successful in doing that, as subsequent results showed.
Okay,
about the 9th of August, everybody started to get a queasy feeling in the pit of their stomach that something was very, very wrong. Nobody had any idea what. But many people, virtually, not the entire crew, but virtually the entire crew, felt very uneasy. As I recall, Von Neumann didn't. The other officers didn't, but I did and Duncan did. It would only be another 3 days before we found out there was really something radically wrong. But it was not with our equipment. Comes the 12th of August, of course. We go again back down to the first test site, very close to it. And then we have, for this test, 3 ships for observers. A carrier, a Coast Guard ship, name unknown, and a commercial ship, one of the merchant ships, the USS Freyaseth, and of course the various observing people on board them. In terms of the carrier, of course, we had Von Neumann, we had Captain Harris, and we had some other staff people from the Institute, as well as from the Navy Yard.
Okay, now what we'll do is drop it here, and then we'll pick it up right at the start of the second test. Well, now we get to the interesting part of this overall program, to talk about the actual Philadelphia experiment itself. We've gone in the past where we've talked about your life growing up. We've gotten up to where you did the tests. You had an uneasy feeling in the pit of your stomach before the 12th of August. So take us right up to that point. Here it is, the morning of August 12th, 1943, and the famous Philadelphia experiment is about to happen.
Okay. By the time the 12th of August rolled around, we'd all more or less gotten used to that queasy feeling and figured, well, this is it today. Whatever happens, happens. And we became somewhat resigned to it, though we still didn't understand why we were basically uneasy. So on that morning, the test crew marched aboard the ship. Duncan and I were there, and not immediately and down on the hold where we ran all the equipment, but we were on board. The captain of the ship was there, and of course, for that particular occasion, they had 3 test ships. They had, I should say, 3 observer ships. And there were 3 test ships too, for that matter, but we're not getting into that at this moment. And the USS Freyaseth, which was a standard commercial ship for hauling cargo across the Atlantic or wherever.
Were there any medical ships around?
No medical ships around per se, no. There were some medical people on board the carrier, I'm sure, but there was no specific need felt for a medical ship as such. If anything went wrong, there wasn't going to be much they could do out there in the middle of the bay anyway. They're going to have to get the ship back or unload the personnel if they had to and take them ashore and into the yard or any of the naval facility hospitals.
So all of those ships were just sitting out there for observation purposes, right?
Now, one of the interesting points about this, which I'd almost forgotten about, but is perhaps important, there was a sudden change of plans on the morning of the 12th of August. Captain Harrison, in the process of observing the first test on the 22nd of July, as I have mentioned, noticed a very large water line, much larger than the ship. A water line meaning this is where the water apparently stopped, and then you had a vacuum, so to speak, a space there you couldn't understand. And, of course, there was no ship in there, but the hole in the outline of a ship was much larger than the ship itself. And he could not see, looking through his binoculars in the deck of the carrier, he could not see where the water was down at the bottom. So to speak, there should have been a bottom level where you could see the water. Well, he couldn't.
Did it look like a black hole or something?
It looked very much like a black hole. Now, he was concerned that he wasn't sure whether that ship was actually riding in water that they couldn't see or whether it was floating in air. So he had planned for a series of special tests on the 12th of August, which included special seismometers, special measuring devices on board the Eldridge, including a special secondary crew just to run those pieces of equipment, and a submarine which was scheduled to go around the hole, if you will, and see, is it really a hole or what's going on here? Now, for whatever reason, at the last minute, they canceled all of those extra tests. The submarine was not scheduled in to be part of it, and the secondary crew was not put on board the ship. The equipment was already there, but they didn't use it or do anything with it. And all of the regular personnel got on board the ship. It went down river to its point where it was stationed for the test, and then by command on the radio came the orders, turn on the equipment.
Let's go back a little bit about, again, how many people were on the ship, the Eldridge, when this actually happened on the 12th?
The test crew was, again, right around 30, about 35 total.
Okay, and the names of the people that you recall, certainly Duncan is one of them.
Oh, yes, Duncan was one of them.
Any others?
Myself,
right.
Brother Jim, who was not part of the first test because they drew straws, so to speak, as to who was going to be first on the list for the first test, and then they drew the leftovers, so to speak, were used on the second test. Since Jim didn't draw the straw, or a younger brother, for the first test, he was on the second one. And anyone who was not used on the first test was used on the second test. Of course, this guy I knew by the name of Wild Bill, as we nicknamed him, Wild Bill Cody, was part of the second test. And there's some other people whose names I cannot remember at this point. Because it's hard to remember the names of those people from that far back, particularly when you're going through more than one set of brainwashing techniques. But the specific ones that I've mentioned had a very good reason to remember them.
Do you remember their faces, though?
Faces?
Yeah.
Yes, some of them I do.
Right.
Because the picture of the graduating class, as we called it, for the Eldridge, or where my father was the head of it, some of those faces in there are very familiar to me, even though I do not remember the names. Not all of them. I would say about half are quite familiar.
It's interesting because a lot of the technical details, you have almost, a photographic memory about those.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the other details, such as the name of the captain or things like that, become much more difficult to you.
The captain was, of course, a temporarily assigned captain.
Right.
And I ran across that name once, but I do not recall it at this time. And some of the other personnel, in fact, all of the personnel for these tests were temporarily assigned for the specific purpose of those tests only. They were not regular crew members. They were not part of a regular crew. And the regular crew that would be assigned later on was not the people who were involved with these tests.
Okay. So about what time did this test occur?
Started right around 1000 hours, as they would call it, 10 a.m. in civilian time. And we turned on the equipment.
And how far out did you go?
We went downriver about 6 miles, very close to where the first test was undertaken next to Tinicum Island. And there's two other ships, Coast Guard Cutter and the SS Furioseth, were there along with the carrier. And the Furioseth also had an observer on it, which was a man who figured in one of the earlier books, Carlos Miguel Allende. His real name was not Carlos